Thank you, Malcolm. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and my special gratitude to the keynote speakers this morning who gave us some illuminating points to discuss, which I'm sure will take forward in a useful way. Will you please forgive me for putting the economic kind of touch to these proceedings in the few comments I have jotted down during these interventions? Well, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is that us economists believe very much in rationality, in economic agents pursuing their own best interest in order to then result somehow in a social good. Or should we believe the converse of it, that we should be pursuing some social good which at the end of the day will benefit us, especially also as individuals? Whatever line of thought or vocation we may wish to take, rationality is key. Rationality being a way of acting which is conducive to problem solving, but which will then require information in order to be able to ask the right questions, get the right answers, and come to the best decision-making possible, or at least one which is consistent with our objectives. In all this, financial markets are very special. We are not here buying or selling ice creams or some other simple products. We are selling and buying products which are reaching across the entire spectrum of the economy and of society. They are very fast. Conditions are changing and products are changing very, very quickly. But they also have very long-term consequences. What I may be deciding today on my financial investments may affect my life and that of my children. And they're also extremely complicated to understand, so information there is a big issue. And one perhaps provocation I would like to immediately make is, should certain financial products be treated like alcohol or cigarettes? Simply be banned to those who are not adequate to consume them, to use them. This is a point which perhaps Jeffrey might want to take up later. Information. I have just described information as being necessary for me to make my decision and buy the product. But then we also know that nowadays information is itself the product, is itself the thing which whoever works in the information world is trying to sell. So how shall I make the distinction when I'm receiving the information? Am I receiving information which will help me buy a financial product or make a financial decision? Or am I simply consuming the information for its own sake? I remember one of the leading world press houses through its television medium featuring a journalist way back last summer when there was a crash in the market on a Monday. On a Monday, the journalist was, on top of the world. On Tuesday, when everything resolved itself, this journalist had the face of, someone who has lost his cat or something like that. Why is this happening? Why did this journalist really want, and emotionally convey this message that he wanted another 2008, 2009 debacle? Now, this also has an implication for Malta, because we know that the information we consume, well, not only in Malta, of course, but elsewhere in the world, but in Malta there is also the political polarization, which we may have to filter through before consuming some kind of financial market information. A further point of difficulty: where does information lie? It lies everywhere, and by everywhere I don't mean only in newspapers, media, and so on. It's also lying in the actions of people, in the prices we observe, and as well in the word of mouth that we say to each other. So it's also a noisy word. Do we complain of not enough information? Perhaps that's one reason why people don't participate so much in the stock market in Malta. Or shall we complain of too much information? Information and choice overload. So there is also an optimum level of information that we should be receiving. Too much of it, and it could be detrimental perhaps. Reputation, brand trust, which we have heard in the interventions this morning, build on truth. But then I have a big difficulty with defining the word truth. It is such a subjective concept. Exactly. It is my personal experience. I have sat in boardrooms, I have sat in the opposite of a counter buying a financial product, and I was seeing the same episode from two different perspectives, both of which, hand on heart, were true, depending on the objectives that were to be pursued. Important role of the authorities, therefore, in finding the right balance between freedom of information and safeguarding the interests of those who are vulnerable because they are suffering from information asymmetry, therefore from the lack of information which providers of products may have in a superior way. And the final question, perhaps, which is the reason why we have gathered this morning, is also to debate within the limitations of the market size in Malta. There are only a few providers, perhaps. The characteristics of the local media. Is it the media which is to be entrusted with providing good information and good decision making to the public at large? Or should there be other channels and vehicles so as to ensure that at the end of the day people behave in a rational and reasonable way on the basis of information which is supplied to them and which is most useful to them, including cases where certain products could be viewed as harmful to an individual. I leave over for some comments to the distinguished panel that we have today.
There's quite a good list of things to discuss. Of course, the thing which interests me most is consumer protection. Let me share with you an anecdote which I haven't shared much in public, but I did so in private. In 2000 and I think it was 2002, I was asked by Professor Bannister to transpose a particular directive called the Investor Compensation Scheme Directive. I was involved in the transposition of the Investor Compensation Scheme. Then I was also involved in the transposition, doing the final touches for the Depositor Compensation Scheme, and since 2003 I've been involved ever since as the Secretary of the Management Committee managing the two schemes. They're separate and distinct, but there's only one management committee. But when I was involved, I was preparing. It was my first ever foray in transposing the investor directive. And in the investor compensation scheme, there is a requirement that states that the scheme is required to pay investors within 3 months from the date when a claim is successfully reviewed. It's something of that sort. So then I asked myself, and I said, okay, so if an investment services company were to ever fail, I had to think, because at the time there were no experiences of an investment firms failing. So if a company were to fail on the 1st of January, and on the 1st of January the authority will issue what is called a determination. It would say this license holder is unable to pay investors, unable to pay return investments, return money to them. So Then we start getting information from the claimant because they had to apply. And then we have 3 months from the date when we process, when we review and successfully say, okay, we are going to pay. So we have 3 months. That could take ages. So I interpreted it in a manner which says, from a consumer protection viewpoint, we should pay within 3 months from the date of the determination, of the date when the authority says, this company is unable to pay. Little did I realize how difficult that could be. Little did I realize that there's so much work involved when an investment company were to ever fail. Especially if the payment, which is only up to 20,000 euro, but that's what the directive says, and it has not been changed ever since, although there was a project which apparently has been shelved way back in 2010 to revamp the whole directive. Little did I realize the amount of work, the amount of issues that are involved whenever an investment firm were to ever fail. On the 7th of August 2014, it was a very hot day. Everyone was planning to spend some time, on the beach. At 8:30 in the morning, a colleague of mine from another unit came and knocked at my door and said, Jeffrey, I have a question for you. I said, come in. She said, my uncle went to a firm and he wanted to sell his investment. And the reply was, we cannot do so now. We're very sorry. And I told her, how strange. How can it be? It's a normal investment. It's a bond. How can it be that, you cannot do so now? So, as I usually do, and I have, we are the recipients of a lot of information from the public. Sometimes I do not know what my other colleagues from the other units are doing. So I called a colleague of mine, another director, and I asked her, do you know anything? I've got this query which is a bit strange. And he said, Jeff, I think we need to talk to you. She said, yes. And I can tell you that the day after the news feature, the news featured on PBS, we were inundated with phone calls. And that is usually what happens when there is a major report on TV or on any newspaper relating to financial matters. The amount, at a point in time, some 2 years ago, we had processed around, in 2 days, following a news report, we had processed around 450 phone calls over a 2-year period from clients of a firm who were reading some news in the newspapers concerning their investments. Apart also from the fact that people were coming to MFSA, and at a point in time, I think there were around 30 or even more investors waiting in the MFSA reception area, waiting and asking for our questions, and I had to, meet them to allay their fears. So, investors and financial services consumers have been, financial services is a subject which sometimes is out of reach for many consumers. I'm not 100% in agreement with what Gordon said and in your speech, Your Excellency, in regards to the participation of the Maltese on the Maltese financial market. I think Edward would be able to explain this too.
I already took that note.
Oh, good. I'm sure. Because, for example, I've read in the news that, as you know, whenever there's a new issue in Malta, it's always...
my notes,
I know,
please.
I'm not reading. But after 20 years working at the authority, you know, these things come immediately to mind. So there's always oversubscription, and that relates to what Gordon said about people being rational and people being irrational. Consumers, many a times, are irrational, even if they've got substantial information in front of them in order for them to be able to take an informed decision. No matter how much information you give to a person. Gordon came up with an example of ice creams. You can see an ice cream. You can taste an ice cream. You can enjoy an ice cream. But when it comes to a financial product, the only thing you can imagine, you can only imagine it. You can only imagine what's going through the minds of the product providers by reading the documentation. And it's true that we always say that when I'm on TV, on radio, even my colleagues, they always say, read the prospectus. I have to say so, but I know that the prospectus sometimes, not even some financial advisors would read it. Some financial providers, some of them, not all, because the majority of them know what they do and act in the best interests of their clients. But some of them, a few, cannot even imagine how the product is going to work. Because if they do, they will not offer it to investors. There has been some structured products which have gone tremendously wrong for the investor. I've received a number of complaints, you know, about products which have gone terribly wrong. And so the issue is, should the regulator channel investors towards taking the right decision for them? And that is something which has happened and which unfortunately was not picked up by the media because it's very technical. The last bond issue, which was issued by a local bank, the characteristic of the security, the characteristic of the bond, was such that it made it unsuitable for a number of investors. The authority has absorbed and appreciated the fact that many investors are not rational to take a good or the right decision in their best interests. Some investors have a lot of money, and we've come across many investors with substantial amounts of money who purchased investments without having any idea of what they were purchasing. Of course, there was the responsibility of the stockbroker to, you know, guide them through the process. But then at the end of the day, you know, these investors still proceeded in that manner. So there is also this new way of channeling investors to do the thing which it would be in their best interest. I can tell you, I think the regulator also was criticized for this, but this is something which has not happened for the first time in Malta. I think it happened elsewhere, especially in the UK and even in the United States, where we're seeing this behavioral policy making in order to nudge consumers to do some things rather than the other way. I've taken a lot of time, sorry, but I tried to continue building on what Gordon said.
Is there really this kind of culture among the Maltese investor of understanding that certain products could go down as well as up, as adverts usually inform us? But is it really there, or do we complain after the fact has happened?
First of all, thank you. When I was asked by Malcolm to replace someone else, who couldn't make it this morning, I didn't ask what my role is going to be or what I have to say. Until a few minutes ago, I was asking around what are the questions you're going to ask me. So I haven't been well prepared at all. But the speeches before me obviously gave me a lot to speak about this morning. And although there are a lot of insinuations about the industry, which I was not really prepared to tackle this morning, because I think over here we should be speaking about the media's involvement in financial services. And I think I should spend a few minutes because although by profession I am not a journalist, I do have regular contributions in the media. Towards the end of the time that you allot, I will be addressing the points that you've been raising, because there are a lot of misconceptions. There are things that, yes, can go wrong, but I wouldn't put all the investment services providers in one basket, as we mentioned. So I'll leave that towards the end. But as a start, yes, I'm not a journalist. I am an investment services license holder together with other colleagues in our company. And it was about 9 years ago. Actually, I think it was after a seminar of the Tumas Group Foundation where I started contributing to the media, because I attended one which was at St. James Cavalier. I believe it was in 2006 or 2007. Just to see how sort of the normal journalists, deal with financial services matters. And that is where I started getting an interest into the media. And it actually happened in about 2007 when there was an intervention in the press, a very short intervention by a journalist explaining the financial performance of a company in particular. And to be honest, it made such bad reading that I said, look, I really need to start intervening. And at the beginning, I started trying to put the record straight as I got a bit more accustomed to writing, and although I had a couple of, I wouldn't say yellow cards, but almost yellow cards from the authority over here because I used certain terms, I developed my writing, which is now 9 years later, But in actual fact, and this is my message, and I wrote an article recently about this, my role over there in the market is literally to try and explain the matters to the people out there. My role is not there to try to educate the institutional investors, the people who work in the industry. As much as possible, I try to go down to the level, of the man in the street who possibly called Jeffrey these 450 phone calls to try and understand what is happening. I might not always manage to go down to that level because certain words are technical in nature, but that is my view, not only to speak about developments in the market, both locally and internationally, but also to give some, I hope it is unbiased views on a company's performance and developments. Jeffrey accused some providers out there of not reading the prospectus when there is an issue out there. I don't know who is pointing fingers to. I mean, I can vouch that, unfortunately, each of these documents that do come out, I read from cover to cover. It's not nice reading sometimes because it's very legal. I'm not a legal person, But I feel the duty that, yes, we need to basically read it, understand it, because no person out there, even if they are retired and have a lot of time on their hands, will go through 100 or 100-page document of some very small print at times. I've been very critical with certain issuers in particular. I know they didn't take it lightly. I know that I've lost certain work because of this criticism, but it will not stop at that. I know there are certain people, in the industry okay, and in issuers who don't speak to me today because I wrote certain things about their company, you know, and they just turn their face when they see me. But this will not stop me, because I think the market out there, okay, it's not financially rewarding to me, believe me. Market out there deserves, you know, the truth to be told the way at least I see it. I mean, other people can have other opinions, but that is why my contribution is over there. So that is sort of my role in the media, you know. What I've always asked for, and over the past few years, some companies have started to basically look down the route of providing more information, because back in the days when I used to, obviously, filling in an article every week and coming out with a different topic every week is no mean feat. And when you try to even interview certain CEOs and try to find out information, they were always very protective, you know, not wanting to share certain information with you. And at the end of the day, okay, if you are a public issuer, if you've put your name in the market, if you have, as you said, financial products, okay, we call them instruments more than products, because if you're speaking about plain vanilla equities or bonds, okay, those are not products per se, they're actual financial instruments. But if you have asked the public to participate with you, okay, whether it is an equity or a bond, you have to be open, okay, and you have to be answerable to analysts like myself, basically, who try to discover certain information, basically not for my own benefit, but to explain that to the market at large. Certain issuers are still very adamant at literally sticking to the bare minimum of information, which I think is very bad indeed, okay? Other issuers have become more accustomed to be open, even in the type of announcement that they've produced. So this is basically my role over there. It's not an easy task, as I said, and there are many developments that obviously concern a lot of people. But today, even with the use of the internet, you know, people who have time, you know, I mean, before the speaker, Elena Perso, mentioned sort of some contributions in the Financial Times, who has access to a journal like that, obviously gets a lot of very important information. And that article about the Italian pensioner who committed suicide was a very touching article. I had read it, basically, and distributed amongst my colleagues in the office. And it came at a point in time, and this will link to what Jeffrey was saying, to the subordinated bond in issue, okay, just before Christmas. And over here, I think I should spend a couple of minutes, if you allow me, to address certain issues that were mentioned. As Jeffrey said, two of the speakers before me actually mentioned the lack of participation of local investors in the local market. I beg to differ completely. In fact, there was a recent bond issue, okay, that attracted a record number of applicants, over 9,000 applicants. For a small community like Malta, that is a very large number, okay, where they basically applied for over 230 million in a corporate bond issue, coming out of a reputable family name, but still a lot of money. We're not even used to accustomed to those type of numbers when it comes to a sovereign bond, a Malta government stock, which usually is the most popular. So the popularity has increased, and this is mainly because of the times we're living in, the very low interest rate scenario. So the market has become very popular indeed. Okay, turnover, as I've explained in my two recent articles, both on the equity market and on the bond market, has increased in a very big way, and in fact we're at record levels. So there is a lot of participation out there. I don't see that is, you know, where the buck should stop. We've come a long way since the stock exchange has been set up in 1992. Unfortunately, I don't believe there are any members of this stock exchange, as in employees, you know, or directors of the stock exchange here. But I feel, and I've mentioned this in the press before, that there needs to be a more forward-looking approach at the stock exchange. Just coming back to what Jeffrey said, during the recent subordinated bond, yes, there were a lot of questions asked about, you know, how we go about it. And in fact, I dedicated 2 articles. It was a good way to fill up 2 weeks of my columns, basically, on what the actual subordination means, okay, and the actual nitty-gritty of how to go about applying for a bond. Unfortunately, those people who did follow the rules and had to go through this tedious question and answer, okay, which took us easily 45 minutes to an hour with certain clients, certain even well-established clients of ours did not, although I intervened in the media, did not really understand, okay, the method and why they have to go through this question and answer, which was a bit of, I think, to them, it was a bit degrading that they have to sit in front of you, read this document and see if you've actually passed the test, and we're taken for a ride in the industry. Some people actually, because we felt and we did the duty, okay, and now I'm speaking in a personal capacity, to tell the people, don't even come to our office to undergo the test, okay, because you will not pass the test, okay. A few hours later, they phoned me, they said, you didn't accept me, but I phoned up this person, I phoned up that person, I didn't need to go to the office, but 5 minutes on the phone is all it took me. Now tell me what the MFSA will be doing about this. Because these are the things, because unfortunately, if you have certain people like ourselves, okay, who I would say most often than not follow, okay, the rules by the book, and then there are other people out there, okay, who find escape routes out of all, but yet, unfortunately, we don't hear, okay, what happens in these cases. And on that, I think I'll create a bit of a discussion around this.
Can I react to your last comment?
I'm sure you would, that's why I mentioned.
Earlier on, reference was made to prospectuses. Yes, it is true, prospectuses are read by the absolute minority of investors. In fact, when you mentioned 9,000 people having subscribed to that bond to which you referred, I was about to say, but do you know how many of those 9,000 actually read the prospectus? And I'm positive. I'm sure you don't know the answer. So where is the Pandora?
I wouldn't like to know.
No, but it's important. It's important not to know, but it's important to realize the nature of the Pandora's box. It kicks off from, regrettably, the European Union. The European Union, motivated by a sincere wish that as little crisis happen in member states as possible, as few people, investors, lose their money through ignorance as possible. Beyond that, when drafting directives, the European Union has no choice but to draft directives in the way they are drafted. By the time that a directive goes to the EU process, Parliament, Council, etc., then it comes to local parliaments, then it comes to MFSA. By that time, it becomes a lawyer's paradise. And I don't think I'm wrong in saying that prospectuses, in their majority, are drafted in a way, in a verbiage, which satisfies all the legal questions. Where does that leave us? Nowhere with regards to potentially investing people. We are living in a country, this is where the one-size-fits-all approach starts kicking in. We are, unfortunately, living in a country which has, and I'm sure President Emeritus will agree with me on this, and where there is big reticence towards the simple act of reading. And if we're going to give people a voluminous prospectus to read before carrying out what to them, rightly or wrongly, is a Monday exercise, no different to going to the grocer early in the morning in the Great Metropolis. We have this big gap. Question, can we have prospectuses, whether it is the MFSA which does this, whether it is the stockbrokers themselves which does it, reduced to simple, not more than 5 yes, no question, which, I mean, I'm a member of the board of the MFSA, and I can tell you, we had a hell of a discussion when we went into the nitty-gritty of appropriateness tests, of suitability tests. It's not an easy situation we are in. People are lazy, people don't want to read. We must create a situation where the market really, as the Americans say, shows things for what they are. Otherwise, we're not moving. There is, again, this big gap. I'm not blaming the European Union for drafting the prospectus directive the way it is. I know that. Huh? I can't blame them because that's what the European Union exists to do. But is it imagining, right? I mean, when thinking through a directive, through the draft, are we following the process right through to the ultimate potential consequences in the market? And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Capolina from APS Bank. Thank you. We have loads of magazines that they are addressed to the general public, that they are financial in their scope and sort of they can discuss basically financial topics, etc., etc. I would like to see what is your opinion about the quality and the information that such publications are giving to the general public. Because sometimes it seems that, I cannot generalize, but sometimes they are just articles promoting companies, etc., etc. They are not highlighting any issues or educating general public. And maybe, I don't know if it's the time to have some sort of benchmark for certain journalists that work in that field. Certain journalists, sometimes you see the same journalist writing an article about, I don't know, cookies and cakes, and the next time round you see writing up.
I don't do cooking articles. I
I
just
don't.
don't.
I'm not very nice.
Once the question is addressed to me, I stick to that. Don't worry. I have enough.
But at the end of the day, I agree with you. We encounter a number of people that they are writing such articles, and they don't have a clue about profit and loss, etc., and for the financial industry in general. What is your sort of view about
Basically,
it?
I'm not going
And
to.
maybe if there are plans, maybe in the area of journalism, to I don't know, there are some benchmarks or do some standards, etc.
We are now engaging MCAST. And perhaps by October, a journalism course will start at MCAST to prepare journalists professionally for our media. So not specifically a financial journalist, but journalists at large. A proper preparation for to be a professional journalist in one of our newspapers.
Politics aside, I think there are, there needs to be some further stories, some further investigative stories from a financial aspect on the governance of certain companies. That's very important. That's very important for the economy. That's very important for the way companies are managed. All right? So, of course, there's also our role to educate consumers, to inform consumers. One thing that takes a lot of my time, but I do because I'm also learning in the process, is a dedicated program which I'm doing on Campus FM, which I'm also retransmitting on PBS, on Radio Malta. 3 days ago, I received a phone call at 8:30 in the evening from someone who I don't know. He found my entry on the directory and he called me and he said, yesterday I was hearing you on the program about an association of small shareholders in Malta. How can I get in touch with them? Because I don't have internet. I don't know how to use the internet. I'm illiterate, but I want to get in touch with them. He phoned me at home. I had no problem, giving them the number, etc. So we're also trying to fill the gap, but there still needs a lot to be done, I must say.
So basically, Mr. Consiglio mentioned before the prospectus directive, that it is, drafted in a way that and then the document is rather legal. I must add that in Malta, we always love making our Made in Malta rules. So although the prospectus directive is what it is, the MFSA and then comes out with even further rules to make it more complicated. Okay, so let's not point fingers at someone at the EU Commission because the prospectus directive is what it is, but then because we want to be holier than some people up there sometimes, we just make Made in Malta rules just to make it a bit more complicated and maybe more companies and then to not offer their instruments to the market because there are many investors who and then if there aren't companies that you don't offer them instruments to the market because of these made in Malta rules, what happens? They go and invest overseas in companies where definitely they don't read the prospectus, definitely they don't know or understand, and they can't see or touch. At least certain local companies, they can meet the CEO, they can meet the CFO, they have access to more information, and that is what will be happening if these made in Malta rules all become more cumbersome.
I have to be honest that I do not read subscriber-based information because it's not really relevant to, when you make choices as a reader from a distance, then you go to the open source information because I don't need what is probably very useful content on subscriber-based internet outlets. So you can guess how limited my pool is, my pool of information. But I am an observer of the media here in Malta because I'm a Maltese citizen and I still feel close to home. There is I've seen a number of efforts, including in my discussions with Malcolm, to prepare this presentation to provide the tools. It is true that sometimes the reaction here in Malta is you can bring to the horse to the water, but you can't force the horse to drink. So even with a lot of well-targeted information campaigns, brochures, what needs to be done? Do companies all need to have sort of communications, large financial companies, banks, do they all need to have a communications person to be working with, the customer services departments to preempt? Is this the way? I think that if Malta is already a well-known jurisdiction, but if it wants to grow, I think there'll be opportunities for companies to grow, and then the need to take care of how that information is managed from the company perspective becomes important. So that creates also a broader network of contacts for journalists. After all, journalists, if they work for a newspaper, a radio station, they are working on the basis of public interest. So they should be chasing stories that are in the public interest. The sector offers ample examples of what is in the public interest. Is it in the public interest to know that company accounts are not exactly, an investment company accounts are not exactly what is being declared? I would think so.
I am a private investor. So my interest here is really the topic of this presentation. What do journalists in Malta, how do they report financial affairs? Well, over the many years that I've been doing it, I've seen an improvement, particularly as Edward has pointed out. I enjoy his contributions. But in all honesty, there's a dearth of financial information for the investor out there, the lay person who has a problem of doing something with his savings. I think there's an honest problem there because we are not being informed. And I myself try to attend every annual general meeting of all the public companies I'm a shareholder of. And following day, what we get in the general newspapers is a copy, a direct copy of the statements report, which is published anyway in the annual report. But sometimes there are very good questions put to the chairman in the annual general meeting, and invariably they are never reported on. Now, usually it is those things that might make or create some more interest, but they're not reported on by any of the financial press. Now, we have the Times of Malta who publish 2 weekly, I believe, a financial supplement, and we have a weekly business review. But again, this leaves a lot to be desired in my view. I don't be very critical. I know it's a specialized area, but I agree wholly with Caroline. What you said is that there's a vacuum here, that the financial press must make it more interesting, must come down to the level where they create a story and thereby making a point or teaching or just putting the point across. I think this is very valid, and I think we miss it terribly.
I'm not a journalist. I do write the occasional article, and I'm a former financial investment advisor. As a matter of fact, I was the first one to be licensed by the Central Bank of Malta before MFSA came into being. But I gave up that license years ago. But I speak mainly as a director on two Malta companies that have issued bonds over the years, very successfully. And I think that the criticism that we have too much in the prospectus needs to be watered down a bit. What we need is not, I think as Edward said, not to be more Catholic than the Pope. We have a mixture of directives from the EU plus MFSA. I don't blame Jeffrey at all, because Jeffrey is the one who deals with all the customer complaints. It's the listing authority. I put the blame mainly on, because, as Edward can vouch, because he's written about this, for 3 years the corporate bond market was killed in Malta because of these excessive regulations introduced by the listing committee, not the EU, things like sinking funds and the like, but I won't go into those details. But I'll take the point made by the emeritus president, looking at the way forward. I think what he said about trying to get MCOS to start a course on journalism, and hopefully there'll be specialization, is where we need to go. I mean, what we need to is more Edward Ritzels. I say this not because he's present here, because he is the leading financial journalist in Malta. It's a pleasure to read what he says, because he's educating the public all the time. He tries to write, I think, in plain language, and that is what we need, education. But as some others have spoken before, the pity is we do not have financial journalists of that standard, unfortunately. We need more of those.
Until a couple of months ago I was a journalist in the Times of Malta newsroom for 14 years. And I basically just want to shed some light on the realities in a newsroom. When you're in a newsroom, which means when you are writing for the mainstream press, for the pages that people, that the everyday people are going to look at, not the specialized business pages. The reality is, you're on a tight deadline. We're not specialized, we weren't specialized in everything. The reality also is that, okay, so something happens, there's a financial story breaking. It's complicated. The statements you're going to receive, the jargon that you're going to find if you do some research, is complicated. If you call the authority or try to speak to an expert, it's, please can you send me an email? I'll reply to you tomorrow. No, I need it today, So those are the realities. The solution, perhaps the MFSA should reach out and offer some form of specialized courses or training, simple training. In the end of the day, journalists are consumers who have the skill to translate, which is what we have been talking about. And I would go straight to the editors, speak to the editors, and bring them on board. Answer to that, you'll be fine.
My name is Martin Webb, so I'm in charge of equities at a local stockbroking firm. So Gordon, first thanks for shifting the goalposts, because I wanted to be in the complaining section, but since I'm now in the solution section, I'll have a go. Jeffrey, I thought what you said about corporate governance, that needs to be looked at. I think a lot of what I see is prescriptive. There's very little in terms of principles-based guidance on corporate governance. Mr. Concilio mentioned the prospectus. Me as an equity person, so I'm on the risk side of finance, if you like, put simplistically, I cannot independently glean the risks and rewards of ownership of an equity which from the prospectus that it issues. Okay, so I have to engage with management, get digging, and get under the skin of that investment to understand the risk and rewards of ownership. So when we talk about the media, because I'm trying not to move it too much towards financial services, but keep it within the topic. You say media is the consumer. Absolutely, they can only report what they're given. So if I could just change the emphasis of what Mr. Concilio was saying, it's not so much that the prospectus is so large or that it's in legal speak. The greater crime is that it doesn't actually give you the information one needs to make that investment without an intermediary process between you and that investment. So I think that needs to be looked at. We need less perhaps prescription, more principles. I do think that there's a risk here that sharp cookies can game the system to go through the whole process, tick all the boxes, and use the mechanisms we've got as a risk transfer mechanism, get people's money, pull the wool over their eyes, take most of the rewards of that risk, but transfer the risk out to the investor. So I think if media can, the likes of the finance industry and media somehow get to a position where, in the first place, the information that's put out there is already well processed. That's a lay person. When I say a lay person, we tend to think that if someone is not technical, he's somehow ignorant. Well, he's ignorant of that particular aspect, but he could be a perfectly intelligent person. But if he's given the right info from whatever source, he can actually make a better decision. If I could just make one little comment, we tend to think that high net worths are somehow in a better position to make a decision, or they're more sophisticated, if that's part of the definition. No, they're more able to take the loss if it goes wrong. That's the truth of it. I know some very poor people who are extremely intelligent, and if you give them the right info, they will make the right decision. So, that's just one comment.
John Caruana from Time Asset Management. I want to say a word about disclosures. If you read a lot of articles, especially from the United States, normally if you're an analyst and you're, for example, writing in favor of a commodity or gold, you would disclose whether you'll have an interest in it, whether you're long, whether you're short. It's not truly the culture here in Malta, and I think it is something that it would be ideal as a way forward, that if I'm writing in favor of something, my personal opinion perhaps, I need to disclose whether I have a conflict of interest or whether I would gain if people would start following my opinion. And I think it is something that would help a lot in the local scenario. Thank you.
Good morning, Clive Whitehall, Central Bank of Malta. One point that comes to mind is, when reading the topic title, is media's involvement in financial services industry. And my question is, where is the media today? Where are the editors? Where is their involvement? We as an institution, a government institution, independent institution, when we organize something, we always have problems getting the media's attention. An example, the launch of the annual report. Recurrent every year, it's always a problem getting the media's attention. Why? Because we issue the press release, they know that what our press release will be sent to them, copy and paste, and it's done. No questions, they just don't turn up. Another experience. Earlier, late last year, October, we had the governing council being held here in Malta. The governor actually invited all media over to give an outline of what the proceedings are, how it works, etc. Response, almost nil. The ones that actually turned up was because we actually followed through our agency and we asked them to come over, send over somebody. So again, my point is, where is the media? We're speaking about products and everything, but where is the media to report them? Thank you.
I did think it was a really good idea that perhaps the MFSA does something to help those journalists who would like to know a bit more and understand the sometimes rather difficult language of financial matters. I think that would be a really useful thing to do.
The thing is, yes, the consumers, we say that consumers, there's inertia, lack of interest, so many things, to fit into one day. Life is hectic, life is stressful. And I think it's also the same thing for journalists. The problem is that, yes, journalists also have their deadlines. Journalists also have their lack of resources, okay? But the problem is that, perhaps one has to ask them what would be the suitable time for you to ensure that you will come over for this course and there will be good attendance. Who knows? It could be at 8 o'clock in the evening after the majority of the pages have been closed. I mean, I've worked for 6 months, 20 years ago with the Malta Business Weekly, and I can, say that, life in the newsroom can be quite stressful. So, yeah, it's a good suggestion.
I won't take too much of my time because there are more distinguished guests before us who are going to address us soon. But I too particularly liked the intervention from the person at the back, I didn't get her name before, about life in the newsroom. And specifically, this is how I started my intervention at the beginning. This is why I started writing in the press 9 years ago. Not because I knew what life was over there, but because I saw the product of lack of financial journalism in Malta. And this is what gets me going from one week to the other to try and explain in simple language certain financial terms. Martin's intervention too was very interesting, and what I would like to invite him publicly over here is to continue writing. He used to write, he has excellent analytical skills. We are competitors, but we're friends as well, and I would invite him to continue writing, because although I am one of the main contributors in the press, having different views, having different opinions, having a different perspective to certain possible joint topics that we'll be writing about is always helpful. It can't be just one way, one person says something about a topic. If he or other brokers in the community actually speak out, that would be better for everyone to and then take a more informed decision. Before I close off, I'd like to mention something that Jeffrey said about a conference yesterday of the Institute of Financial AFSP, where apparently I wasn't present. There was intervention by the Malta Stock Exchange on their new listing initiative, and we've been hearing this a lot, and apparently it's going to be launched in a couple of weeks. We mentioned before, and Mr. Consiglio was mentioning about the disclosures in the prospectus and the legal terms. Let's not forget that this new initiative is aimed, as you rightly said, at SMEs. SMEs by their nature and the way the rules are being structured are for very small, I would say, micro enterprises, because most companies in Malta by international standards are SMEs. And hence, okay, it's true there could be some very interesting stories, but that is where the risk is even greater. Mm-hmm. So if we're trying to educate people over here about how to understand and to differentiate between certain types of risks, let's not forget this. Yes. And once we're speaking about the topic, let us not ignore, okay, because the stock exchange is looking at this type of listing, the traditional listings of the larger companies. And I've written in the past in the media over the past couple of years, and I mentioned it again a few months ago, that we need to revisit, okay, the rules that are in place for the more established companies. The fact that only 20 companies have made it to the market, okay, over 25 years is not a very good sign. There seems to be, okay, something lacking over there. Is it a lack of the stock exchange and practitioners getting these companies to the market? Are there certain rules prohibiting, certain companies to come to the market? You need a mix of both. We can't just focus now on the less than 5 million market cap companies, okay, for all our investors, and then to get excited about these, because that is the riskier part of the spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. I will try to conclude synthetically without necessarily doing justice to this rich debate. Starting by putting it in a way which is, I hope, close to the Minister's heart. If there is such a strong demand for quality financial journalism, why is this apply missing? So there must be here some kind of market failure. You have mentioned a number of potential solutions. I think I could group these into 7. First point, most important, education in journalism, in general terms, as well as financial. If we have the product to sell in terms of good quality financial journalism, then possibly demand for it may be there and increase further. Secondly is simplification in information towards better safeguards, however. Thirdly, forcing important companies to have better disclosure and information management with external agents in a way which even better protects potential investors. Consideration of a sector-specific ombudsman on the UK kind of model. banning on the sale of certain products, better health warnings across the media on certain financial transactions or issues, and of course, linking back again to the education issue, the imposition of a code of ethics with appropriate disclosures as maybe to have the quality and the correctness of information. With these points, I thank you very much for participating in this session, and I leave over the floor to Malcolm.